I received $10 million, and my mother, with her new family, has started suing me to take a portion. She didn't think at all when she kicked me out of the house and removed me from the inheritance. Hi everyone. I'm Kelly, and I need to vent and get some advice. My life flipped upside down when my mom, Sarah, remarried. For context, I'm 16, and my new stepdad, Bob, seemed nice enough at first, but his presence changed everything. When Mom married Bob, he moved in with his son, Michael, who's 22. From day one, Michael and I didn't get along. He's the kind of guy who acts like he's always right and constantly talks down to me. Anytime I tried to say something, he'd brush it off with, "You'll understand when you're older." It was infuriating. A few months into their marriage, Mom and Bob had big news. Mom was pregnant. They were so excited, and I tried to be happy for them, but deep down, I knew this meant more changes for me, and not the good kind. One afternoon, Mom sat me down and explained they needed my room for the baby. My stomach dropped. My room was my sanctuary, the one place I could go to feel safe and comfortable. I argued that Michael's room was much bigger and could easily accommodate the baby, but they insisted he needed his privacy. I couldn't believe it. Mom tried to soften the blow. "We'll fix up the storage closet for you. It'll be cozy," she said with a smile. Cozy? The so-called room was a tiny space barely big enough for a bed. But what could I do? They had already decided. Moving into that closet felt humiliating. I couldn't even fit all my things in there. My posters stayed rolled up in the garage because there was no wall space to hang them. My dresser barely fit, and my bed was crammed so tightly that I often bumped into the walls when I rolled over at night. To make matters worse, Michael took every chance to rub it in. "How's the new pad, Kelly? Any owls bringing you letters from Hogwarts yet?" He teased, laughing at his own joke. It wasn't just about the size of the space. It was what it represented. My mom and Bob had made it clear that I was the least important person in the house. I felt like a guest in my own home, an afterthought in a family I barely recognized anymore. Michael only made things worse. He was relentless, constantly finding ways to irritate me. He'd leave his dirty dishes in the sink and blame me when Bob complained about the mess. If I so much as walked to the bathroom late at night, he'd bang on the wall and yell at me to keep it down. I tried to stay out of his way, but it felt impossible. One night, I overheard him talking to Bob. "Kelly's such a brat about the room thing," he said. "She should be grateful she even has a place to sleep. Some kids have it way worse." Hearing that made my blood boil. I wasn't ungrateful. I just wanted to feel like I mattered. When the baby, Jacob, was born, things got even harder. The house was chaos. Jacob cried all night, and in my tiny closet, I could hear everything. I barely slept, and no one seemed to notice or care. During the day, Mom and Bob were consumed with Jacob, and anytime I tried to spend time with Mom, she brushed me off, saying, "Not now, Kelly. Jacob needs me." I understood that babies require a lot of attention, but it still hurt. Then came the day I came home from school to find some of my belongings moved out of my closet. Jacob's toys had been shoved in there without anyone asking me first. I couldn't even have my tiny space to myself anymore. Dinner one night pushed me over the edge. Bob was praising Michael for landing a new job, and Mom was gushing about how excited she was for Jacob's first words. Then Bob turned to me and asked if there was anything new in my life. Before I could answer, Michael jumped in. "Yeah, Kelly's new hobby is sulking. She's getting really good at it." Everyone laughed. Except me. I snapped. "Are you serious? You all treat me like I'm invisible, like I don't matter in this family. You took my room, shoved me into a closet, and now you think it's funny to make fun of me?" The table went silent. Mom looked at me, shocked. "Kelly, I didn't realize you felt that way. We're doing our best." "No, you're doing your best for Jacob and Michael," I interrupted. "Not me." I left the table before anyone could respond and spent the rest of the night crying in my closet. I couldn't stop thinking about whether I was being selfish or if my feelings were justified. Right now, I feel lost. I don't know how to make them understand how much this is hurting me. Part of me wants to confront them again, but I'm not sure it'll change anything. Another part of me just wants to hold out until I turn 18 and can leave this house for good. I don't know what to do. If anyone has advice, I'd really appreciate it. Hi again. Things didn't improve at home after my last update. In fact, they only got worse. By the time I was 18, I felt suffocated. My house wasn't a home anymore. It was just a place I slept when I couldn't avoid being there. I started spending more time with my best friend, Lily, and her older brother, Marcus. Lily and I had been close since sophomore year, and her family welcomed me like one of their own. Her mom, Claire, would ask how I was doing, how school was going, and even how work was treating me. Questions my own mom rarely asked anymore. Being at their house felt like a breath of fresh air compared to the tension I lived with every day. I stayed over so often that Claire jokingly started calling me her bonus daughter. I laughed along, but secretly, I wished it were true. At least in their home, I felt like someone cared about me. Work at Millie's Diner became another escape. I started picking up as many shifts as possible, sometimes working doubles just to stay out of the house. Karen, my boss, was strict but fair. She appreciated hard work, and she knew I wasn't just there to earn extra spending money. One quiet evening, she leaned over the counter and said, "You're a good kid, Kelly. You saving up for something important?" I hesitated before replying, "Yeah, I'm trying to get my own place." She nodded knowingly. "Smart. Don't stop. You'll get there if you keep at it." Her words gave me a little hope. Every crappy tip, every rude customer, every aching foot after a long shift felt worth it because I knew it was part of my plan to leave. One of the worst days during that time was the night Michael decided to throw a party. I had been working on an art project for weeks, a critical piece for a scholarship application. I poured everything I had into it, seeing it as my ticket to a better future. Mom and Bob were out of town, and Michael took it as an opportunity to invite over what seemed like half the neighborhood. I tried to stop him, pleading with him to cancel. "I have a huge project due tomorrow," I said. "I need quiet." Michael just grinned. "Relax, Kelly. It's one night. Don't be such a killjoy." By 9 p.m., the house was overrun with people. Music blared, and strangers filled every corner of the house. I locked myself in my tiny closet room, determined to finish my work. Around midnight, Michael and his drunk friends started pounding on my door, yelling for me to join them. I shouted back, telling them to leave me alone. They laughed and eventually wandered off, or so I thought. When I stepped out to get some water later, I found my project spread out on the kitchen counter. Beer had been spilled across the papers, and someone had drawn obscene doodles in the margins. My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Weeks of work, gone in an instant. Michael walked in, clearly drunk, and shrugged when he saw my face. "Chill out, Kelly. It's just paper. Redo it or something." I snapped. I screamed at him, calling him every name I could think of. For once, he didn't smirk. He just stood there, stunned. I grabbed the ruined project and stormed back to my room, slamming the door behind me. After that night, I was done. I couldn't keep living like that. I started spending every free moment either at Lily's house or at Millie's, working as much as Karen would let me. Mom barely noticed I was around less. She was too busy with Jacob and Bob to care. By the time I graduated, I had saved up a decent amount of money and enrolled at a local college. Finding an apartment was a challenge. Most places were out of my budget, and the ones I could afford were in terrible condition. I spent months searching, checking every listing I could find. Finally, I stumbled across a small studio apartment about 10 miles from campus. It wasn't much, just one room with a tiny kitchenette and a bathroom, but it was mine. Signing the lease felt like the biggest victory of my life. On moving day, Lily and Marcus helped me pack up my things, which didn't take long since most of what I owned fit into a few boxes. As we drove away from my mom's house, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I was finally free, but it also meant officially cutting ties with the family I once loved. When we got to the apartment, I stood in the middle of the room and took it all in. The walls were plain, the carpet was worn, and the sink had a slow drip, but it was mine. That first night, I lay on an air mattress, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything it had taken to get here. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Life isn't perfect now. The apartment is small, and money is tight. But for the first time, I feel like I'm in control of my own life. I still see Lily and her family often, and Karen has become a mentor of sorts. Every day, I remind myself that I earned this freedom. It wasn't handed to me. I fought for it. If you're stuck in a place where you feel trapped, just know that it does get better. It's not easy, and it takes time, but the freedom is worth it. I'm living proof of that. Keep going, even when it feels impossible. You'll look back one day and realize how far you've come. I know I have. A year after moving out, things with my family went from bad to worse. I was finally starting to feel like I had some control over my life, balancing work and college, when my mom called out of the blue. It wasn't unusual for us to go weeks without speaking, so I wasn't prepared for what she said next. Bob updated his will. She started casually, as if she were talking about the weather. He's decided to exclude you. What? I said, frozen in place. Why? Well, it makes sense, she continued. You're not his biological daughter. He wants to make sure Michael and Alex are taken care of. They're his real family. Her words stung more than I could have imagined. I'm not his real family? I've lived with him since I was 16. That doesn't mean anything? Kelly, don't take it personally, she said in that dismissive tone she used whenever she didn't want to deal with my emotions. You're an adult now. You're out on your own. You don't need help like they do. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you're okay with this? I asked. With cutting me out completely? I support Bob's decision, she replied, her voice devoid of emotion. It's what's best for the family. Her words confirmed what I'd suspected for years. I wasn't part of the family anymore. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. The hurt, the anger, the betrayal. It all hit me at once. For days, I couldn't think about anything else. I'd always known that Bob didn't see me the same way he saw Michael or Alex, but hearing it spelled out so clearly was devastating. And knowing my mom supported his decision made it so much worse. She was supposed to be on my side, but instead, she'd chosen him and his kids over me. After that call, I couldn't bring myself to visit them anymore. The thought of sitting at their table, pretending everything was fine, made me sick. Michael didn't help. The few times we crossed paths, he made sure to rub it in. Guess you're officially out of the will, he said with a smirk one day when I ran into him at the store. Not that you were ever really in it to begin with. I wanted to scream at him, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. Instead, I walked away, vowing to cut him, and the rest of them, out of my life for good. Over time, I started focusing more on my studies and work. I threw myself into school, determined to prove to myself that I didn't need them. My grades improved, and I started making connections with professors and classmates. One of those classmates was Maya, a pre-law student who became one of my closest friends. She was sharp, outspoken, and didn't put up with anyone's nonsense. When I told her about my family, she didn't mince words. They sound toxic as hell, she said bluntly. You don't need them. You're doing great on your own. Her words were a wake-up call. For so long, I've been holding on to this idea that I needed my family's approval, that I needed to be included to have value. But hearing someone else say that I was better off without them made me realize that maybe I didn't need them after all. Then, a few months later, I got a letter in the mail from Bob's lawyer. It was a formal notice about the updated will, complete with a breakdown of his estate and a note confirming that I had been removed as a beneficiary. Seeing it in writing made everything feel so much more real. It wasn't just a decision they made in the heat of the moment. It was something they had gone out of their way to make official. I sat with the letter in my hands, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to cry, but another part of me felt strangely calm. This was the final nail in the coffin, the proof that I didn't belong in their world anymore. But instead of letting it crush me, I decided to let it go. They didn't want me, and I didn't need them. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter to my mom. I didn't plan to send it, but I needed to get everything off my chest. I told her how much she had hurt me, how abandoned I felt, and how I didn't think I could ever forgive her. When I was done, I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Maybe one day I'll send it, but for now, just writing it was enough. Since then, I've been focusing on myself. I'm doing well in school, I've made some great friends, and I'm working towards a future that doesn't include them. It's not easy, and some days are harder than others, but for the first time, I feel like I'm in control of my own life. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive my mom for what she did, but I'm done waiting for an apology that will probably never come. Instead, I'm choosing to move forward. If they don't want me in their family, that's their loss, not mine. It was a typical afternoon when my phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the screen. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something about this call made me answer. A calm, professional voice greeted me. "Miss Kelly Larson?" they asked. "Yes, that's me," I replied, already wondering what this was about. "My name is Jonathan Avery, an attorney based in New York. I'm reaching out regarding the estate of Eleanor Larson." I froze, confused. "I think you've got the wrong person," I said hesitantly. "I don't know anyone named Eleanor Larson." "Ms. Larson, Eleanor was your father's older sister. She passed away recently, and I'm the executor of her will. You have been named as the sole beneficiary of her estate." For a moment, I couldn't process what he just said. "I don't understand," I managed finally. "I didn't even know I had an aunt named Eleanor." "I understand this may be a shock," Jonathan said in a steady tone. "Eleanor was a very private person, but her intentions are clear in her will. It would be best to discuss this in person. Are you able to come to my office in New York next week?" I agreed, still dazed. The rest of the day felt like a blur. I barely remembered my father. He had died when I was a toddler, and my mother never spoke about him. Now, I was being told that his sister, a woman I had never even heard of, had left me something significant enough to involve a lawyer. The following week, I found myself sitting in Jonathan Avery's sleek, high-rise office. The place was polished, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, and it made me feel small. Jonathan greeted me warmly and invited me to sit across from him at a massive desk. "Thank you for coming," he began. "I know this must feel overwhelming. Honestly, I don't even know what to think," I admitted. "Why would Eleanor leave anything to me? I didn't even know she existed." Jonathan gave me a sympathetic smile and opened a folder filled with documents. "Eleanor was deeply connected to her family's legacy, even if she didn't maintain close relationships. She followed your life from a distance after your father passed away. She felt a sense of responsibility toward you and wanted to ensure you had the resources to build the life she believed you deserved." He handed me a paper that outlined the estate. "Eleanor's assets are valued at approximately $10 million. This includes several properties in Manhattan, a diversified stock portfolio, and liquid assets." "10 million?" I whispered, the number almost too large to comprehend. "Yes," Jonathan said calmly. "Eleanor was an incredibly savvy investor. She started with modest means, but her investments in real estate and the stock market were exceptional. Everything she owned has been left to you." I sat there in stunned silence as he slid a sealed envelope toward me. "She also wrote you a letter, which I think will help explain her intentions further." I left his office that day clutching the envelope and a thick folder of documents. My mind was spinning with questions. Who was Eleanor, really? Why hadn't I known about her? And why me? Over the next few days, I read and reread the letter Eleanor had left for me. She wrote about her childhood with my father, describing how close they had been before he married my mother. She admitted that she hadn't approved of the marriage, believing that my mother cared more about his financial stability than about him as a person. After my father's death, Eleanor had tried to reach out, but my mother had refused her attempts at contact. Feeling shut out, Eleanor had decided to step back, though she never stopped thinking about me. In her letter, she explained how much she regretted not being more involved in my life. She had followed my struggles from a distance, learning about my difficulties with my stepfamily and my efforts to make it on my own, and she wanted to give me the freedom to live without the burdens I had faced for so long. Her words were both deeply moving and bittersweet. I felt a connection to her that I never expected, as though she understood me better than anyone else ever had. Managing the inheritance was overwhelming. Jonathan introduced me to a team of financial advisors and property managers who walked me through the complex process of handling Eleanor's estate. The townhouse she had owned in Manhattan was beautiful, but it didn't make sense for me to keep it. I decided to sell it, using part of the proceeds to pay off my student loans and set up a savings account. The rest, I invested under the guidance of the advisors. The other properties Eleanor had owned were already rented out, providing a steady stream of income that made it possible for me to cut back on work and focus more on school. I stayed in my small apartment, not wanting the sudden wealth to change who I was. Even with all this money at my disposal, I felt more grounded than I ever had before. Of course, news of the inheritance didn't stay quiet for long. My mom called me not long after, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "Kelly, sweetheart, I just heard about Eleanor's estate. Isn't that amazing? We should talk about how this could benefit the family." I clenched my jaw. "The family? You mean the same family that disowned me?" "Let's not dwell on the past," she said sharply. "This is an opportunity to move forward. We're still your family, and we could really use some help right now." Her audacity left me speechless for a moment. "You've made it clear where I stand in this family." "I don't owe you anything," I said, my voice cold. Then I hung up before she could respond. Michael was no better. He bombarded me with texts, demanding a fair share of the inheritance and accusing me of being selfish. I ignored him at first, but when his messages became increasingly aggressive, I blocked his number. Despite the chaos, I found myself thinking more and more about Eleanor and the legacy she had entrusted to me. I wanted to honor her memory by doing something meaningful with the resources she had left behind. I started volunteering with a nonprofit organization that supported young adults aging out of foster care, helping them find housing and financial stability. It felt like the right way to give back, to pay forward the kindness Eleanor had shown me. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much my life has changed. Just a few years ago, I was scraping by, trying to survive in a household where I was treated like an afterthought. Now, I have the freedom to choose my own path and the means to build a future on my own terms. Eleanor gave me more than just financial stability. She gave me a sense of hope and empowerment that I never thought I'd have. If she were here today, I would thank her with all my heart. She changed my life in ways I could never have imagined, and I'll spend the rest of my days making sure her gift isn't wasted. It started innocently enough, as things often do. My mom, Sarah, called me one evening while I was unwinding after a long day. It had been weeks since we last spoke, and even then, our conversations were brief and strained. Her voice, however, was unusually cheerful, almost syrupy sweet. "Kelly, darling, how have you been?" she chirped. "Fine, Mom," I replied cautiously. "What's up?" "Well," she began, and I could almost hear her forcing a smile through the phone. "I ran into your cousin Melissa the other day, and she mentioned something about your inheritance." From Eleanor. My heart sank. Melissa worked at a law firm and must have caught wind of my recent dealings with Jonathan Avery. She'd apparently shared this information with my mom, despite my clear efforts to keep things private. "Yeah," I said flatly, already bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "Kelly," my mom continued, her tone softening, "you know how much we've struggled since your father passed. Bob and I have been trying to make ends meet, but it's been so hard. The house needs major repairs, we have some debts piling up, and we've been looking into sending Alex to private school. It's just, we could really use some help right now." I closed my eyes, already feeling the weight of this conversation. "What exactly are you asking for, Mom?" "Oh, just a little help," she said, her voice brightening as if she were discussing the weather. "$3 million should cover everything we need." I nearly dropped the phone. $3 million? I repeated, incredulous. "You can't be serious." "Kelly, this money is from your family," she snapped, the sweetness in her voice vanishing. "It's your father's side, which means it belongs to us just as much as it does to you. Don't you think it's only fair to share?" I was speechless. The audacity, the entitlement, it was overwhelming. "Mom, this money was left to me by Eleanor. She didn't leave it to you, or to Michael, or to Alex. She left it to me. And Eleanor was your father's sister," she argued. "Without us, you wouldn't have even known her. You owe us this." I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. Over the next few days, the calls came in waves. First, it was my mom again, pleading with me to do the right thing and accusing me of being selfish when I refused. Then Bob started calling, using his calm, reasonable voice to try and convince me that helping them out was my duty as part of the family. When that didn't work, Michael joined in, but his approach was far less polite. "You're sitting on a fortune, and you're not even doing anything with it," he spat over the phone one evening. Meanwhile, We're drowning in bills, and Alex deserves a shot at a good education. You're just going to let us struggle while you live it up? Michael, I'm not living it up. I shot back. I'm still in my same apartment, working the same part-time job. Just because I have money now doesn't mean I owe any of it to you. He laughed bitterly. Oh, so now you're too good for us? You've always been ungrateful, but this is a new low. I hung up on him too, but the calls didn't stop. They started coming at all hours, sometimes multiple times a day. When I stopped answering, the texts began. Long, rambling messages from my mom, demanding that I reconsider, and short, angry ones from Michael, accusing me of being a traitor to the family. At one point, Bob even left me a voicemail, his voice heavy with disappointment. Kelly, I thought you were better than this, he said. Your mother is heartbroken. All she's asking for is what's fair. Think about that. I deleted the voicemail without responding. The tipping point came when my mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there with Bob and Alex in tow, her expression a mixture of anger and desperation. Kelly, she said, pushing past me into the apartment, we need to talk. I stood there, stunned, as they made themselves comfortable in my living room. Alex looked uncomfortable, his eyes glued to the floor, but Bob was calm and composed, the picture of reasonableness. This has gone on long enough. My mom began, crossing her arms. You're being incredibly selfish, Kelly. This money is from our family, and you know it. We're not asking for all of it, just a portion. $3 million is nothing compared to what you've inherited. It's not about the money, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's about the principle. Eleanor left this to me, not you. She made her choice, and it wasn't yours to question. Bob chimed in. Kelly, no one's saying you shouldn't have the money, but family helps family. We're in a tight spot, and you have the means to make a real difference. Bob, don't pretend this is about helping the family. I snapped. You cut me out of your will because I wasn't real family, remember? So why is it my responsibility to fix your problems now? That struck a nerve. Bob's calm demeanor faltered, and his face darkened. That's not fair, he said quietly. Neither is this, I replied. The argument dragged on for what felt like hours. My mom grew more emotional, accusing me of abandoning them, while Bob tried to appeal to logic and Alex stayed silent in the corner. Eventually, I'd had enough. I want you all to leave, I said firmly, standing up. This conversation is over. My mom looked at me like I'd slapped her. Kelly, now, I said, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. They left reluctantly, my mom muttering about how ungrateful I was as she walked out the door. In the weeks that followed, I started receiving messages from other relatives, cousins, aunts, even distant family members I hadn't spoken to in years. It was clear my mom had been spreading her version of the story, painting me as the selfish, spoiled niece hoarding the family's fortune. Some of the messages were polite but insistent, asking me to do the right thing, while others were outright hostile, accusing me of betraying the family. I tried to ignore it, but it was exhausting. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a pang of anxiety, wondering who would be harassing me next. Eventually, I changed my number and blocked everyone except a few trusted friends. It was drastic, but it was the only way to get some peace. Despite everything, I refused to give in. This money wasn't about greed or power. It was about freedom, about finally having the resources to build the life I'd always dreamed of. I wasn't going to let them take that away from me, no matter how much noise they made. Looking back, I don't regret standing my ground. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it taught me an important lesson. Sometimes, the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who will hurt you the worst. And sometimes, the only way to protect yourself is to walk away. The legal drama began quietly, almost imperceptibly, until it exploded into chaos. I had been managing to maintain some semblance of normalcy after cutting off contact with my mother, Bob, and Michael. It wasn't easy, but the peace of finally being free from their endless demands was worth the effort. That peace, however, was shattered when I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was plain and unassuming, but as soon as I opened it, a pit formed in my stomach. It was a notice of intent to sue, signed by Bob and Sarah, claiming that I had unjustly withheld inheritance funds that belonged to the family. The document accused me of acting in bad faith and demanded I relinquish a portion of Eleanor's estate to cover their alleged financial hardship. I stared at the letter, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. It wasn't enough for them to harass me with phone calls and unannounced visits. Now they were trying to drag me into court. I called Jonathan Avery, my lawyer, immediately. His calm, measured voice was a lifeline as I explained what had happened. "Don't worry, Kelly," he said. "We'll handle this. I've seen these kinds of cases before, and if their claim is as flimsy as it sounds, they don't stand a chance." Jonathan got to work right away, requesting the full details of their case. What he uncovered was both shocking and absurd. The lawsuit was riddled with inconsistencies and baseless accusations. Worse, the supporting documents they had submitted, purportedly evidence of their financial struggles and my supposed obligation to help, were riddled with errors. Bank statements were clearly doctored, with mismatched fonts and incorrect dates. Even more bizarrely, a letter they claimed was written by Eleanor herself urging me to share the inheritance was an obvious forgery, complete with misspelled words and a signature that didn't match her actual handwriting. Jonathan wasn't just thorough. He was relentless. He began digging deeper, questioning every aspect of the case. That's when we discovered something even more astonishing. The attorney representing Bob and Sarah wasn't legitimate. The address listed for their law office led to an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. The phone number provided in their filings was disconnected. It became clear that whoever they had hired, or pretended to hire, was either a con artist or completely fabricated. When I confronted my mother about this over the phone, she doubled down on her audacity. "We wouldn't have had to do this if you had just helped us in the first place," she snapped. "You forced our hand. By lying? By forging documents and inventing a fake lawyer." I shot back. "Do you hear yourself, Mom?" She didn't respond, but the silence on the other end of the line said it all. Jonathan filed a counterclaim to dismiss the case and demanded a formal investigation into the forged documents. Within weeks, the lawsuit fell apart. The court not only dismissed their claims, but issued a warning against any further attempts to harass me legally. Bob and Sarah were publicly humiliated when the fabricated documents came to light, and their reputation in the community took a major hit. For me, the entire ordeal was exhausting but also strangely empowering. I had spent so much of my life feeling powerless, at the mercy of my mother and her manipulations. Standing up to her in court and winning was a turning point. It was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship, but it also solidified my resolve to protect myself and the life I was building. After the case was dismissed, I met with Jonathan to review the legal safeguards he had put in place to prevent any future interference. "You're in the clear now," he assured me. "They won't be able to touch a cent of Eleanor's estate. And if they try anything like this again, they'll face severe legal consequences." I thanked him, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I could breathe again, knowing that the inheritance Eleanor had left me was safe, and that I had the tools to protect myself from further attacks. Buying a house felt surreal. After months of walking through property after property with my real estate agent, I finally found it, a modest, charming home on a quiet street. The house wasn't extravagant, but it had everything I needed: 3 bedrooms, a cozy living room with a fireplace, and a backyard that felt like a little piece of heaven. It was listed for $800,000. And while the price still made my stomach flip, I knew I could afford it. For the first time, I felt like I was truly building something for myself. The house became my sanctuary. Moving in was a whirlwind of activity, but once I settled, it was like I could finally exhale. The space felt completely mine, free from the chaos and toxicity of my past. I also purchased a small plot of land just outside the city, a future investment, as my financial advisor called it. I didn't have specific plans for it yet, but it felt good to know I was laying the groundwork for a stable future. Owning the house didn't just mean having a place to live. It meant having a home, something I hadn't felt in years. I spent my weekends decorating, painting walls, and planting flowers in the backyard. Every small improvement made the space feel more like me, and with each passing day, I felt a little closer to the peace I'd been searching for. But finding peace wasn't just about the house. It took time, effort, and a lot of introspection. I started seeing a therapist, someone recommended by Maya, who'd been my rock through everything. Therapy was uncomfortable at first. Talking about my family, my childhood, and the pain I'd carried for so long wasn't easy. But my therapist, Dr. Hayes, had a way of making me feel safe. She helped me unpack the complicated emotions I had about my mom, Bob, and even Eleanor. For the first time, I began to understand how deeply their actions had shaped me and how I could let go of the hold they still had on me. Volunteering also became a huge part of my healing process. I started working with a nonprofit that helped young adults aging out of the foster care system. It was something I'd wanted to do ever since I inherited Eleanor's estate, as a way of honoring her and giving back. The people I met through the organization, both the volunteers and the young adults, reminded me of my own struggles, and helping them gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. One day, while I was repainting the guest room, I got a call from Alex. I hadn't heard from him since the disastrous fallout with my mom and Bob, and seeing his name on my phone made me pause. I debated ignoring it, but decided to pick up. "Hey, Kelly," he said, his voice hesitant. "Hi, Alex," I replied cautiously. "What's going on?" "I wanted to apologize," he said quickly, as if he'd been rehearsing the words. "For everything. For how Mom and Michael treated you. For not saying anything when it was all happening. It wasn't right, and I'm sorry." His words caught me off guard. Alex had always been quiet, staying out of the drama that surrounded our family, but hearing him acknowledge what I'd been through meant more than I realized. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means a lot. I just wanted you to know," he continued. "I'm not like them. I don't agree with what they did. And if you ever need anything, I'm here." We talked for a while longer, catching up on his life. He was finishing high school and thinking about going to college, but he sounded unsure, like he didn't really believe it was an option for him. Before we hung up, I told him to call me if he ever needed help. It felt like a small step toward rebuilding at least one relationship in my fractured family. As the months went by, I felt lighter. The house, therapy, volunteering, and even that conversation with Alex all contributed to a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I was starting to see a path forward, a way to live without being weighed down by the past.